What Horizon Zero Dawn modifications are the best for each type of weapon? Let's break it down in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below and don't forget to hit that like button. One thing you should know is that it doesn't make sense to put modifications on your weapon that give plus percentage to something that your weapon can provide. For example, if you have a blast sling and you got damage modifications that also give plus tear, then you can better go for the damage modifications that give you, for example, 1% more damage than, the tear. Because it doesn't make sense. It just simply doesn't do anything to put tear on a blast sling. Okay, with that tip out of the way, let's take a look at the rope caster. With this weapon you can of course trap the enemy. It's very handy versus a Stormbird and a Glint Hawk, for example, to put them on the ground. So for this weapon you can use two modifications, handling and tear. Tear makes sure that you trap the enemy faster, while handling makes sure that you shoot the enemy faster to then also trap him faster. But then it requires more ropes. So it's really what you think is more handy. But for example, versus a rockbreaker, you can't really shoot a lot because he will go under the ground. So then tear is better to make sure that every hit is way more sufficient. For one of my favorite weapons in Horizon Zero Dawn, the blast sling that of course already noted in this video, only damage is really handy. This increases the amount of damage that every ammo type does. Okay, you can also go for handling to make sure you shoot faster, but it will only cost more ammunition, which is not really recommended. If you do a ton of damage modifications on your blast sling, all the enemies will die really fast. Let's take a look at the different bows, starting with the Shadowhunter bow. A weapon with easy to craft damage arrows for standard damage and also fire arrows. It really depends on what you want to use this weapon for. If you just want to shoot the regular arrows, then damage and handling is really great. For the fire arrows, it's of course really smart to focus on fire modifications, because the enemy will then burn faster, which of course deals a ton of damage and also, saves you some ammunition. You can of course balance it out as well. Doing two fire modifications should be enough for a fast burn if you, for example, use double or triple shot, and then you can also focus on damage. And handling is of course also great, so then you can, shoot your fire arrows faster or your damage arrows faster. I personally use the Shadowhunter bow for fire, so I use a lot of fire modifications, and I use the Shadow Sharpshoot bow for damage. So yes, giving the Shadow Sharpshoot bow a ton of damage modifications is simply amazing, especially if you want to kill the multiple parts of the enemy. A triple shot with damage modifications does a ton of damage. It's also great versus frozen enemies, because then you can really hit them everywhere and do a ton of damage. Of course, you can also focus on the tear blast arrows of this bow to then knock off parts and maybe make their cornices vulnerable. What you can do is switch to the damage modifications in the middle of the fight. So first have tear modifications on your weapon, knock off the parts, and then change to the damage modifications. You can also use two sharp shot bows, one with a ton of damage mods and the other with a lot of tear mods. The more tear mods, the easier stuff will let loose. Although I personally prefer a tear blaster to knock off parts, it's pretty handy to use a sharp shot bow if you want to do that for a longer range. The Warble of course has 3 elemental types of arrows, so that makes it pretty easy to mod. If you want to use your corruption arrows, use corruption mods. Although I personally prefer this one as a freezing bow. So I use a lot of freezing modifications to make sure the enemies freeze really fast. And then for example go with my blast sling with my damage mods, and the result will be amazing, trust me. Then we have 2 weapons left. Let's do the Tripcaster first. A weapon I used in the beginning to toy around with that, but never really in the end game. This is also pretty easy to mod. You of course have to think what kind of traps you want to lay down. Shock mods for shock traps, fire for fire traps, and damage for the blast traps. I don't really think that handling is great for this weapon, since you don't have to put them down really fast, because you're simply preparing for a fight and then are going to do that, or you need to find a great spot to be able to do that in the battle. So I don't think that handling is handy for this weapon. Last but not least is the Rattler. This is kind of a shotgun weapon in Horizon Zero Dawn. It's pretty interesting because it has ice and shock bullets that also deal damage, while all the other ice and shock like arrows only deal that elemental damage. And there's also damage ammo that also doesn't tear. But I think what you want to do is go for or handling or damage. So maybe a combination is also great. Damage is handy for all the bullets that you use, and so is handling, since you will then be able to shoot faster, which is pretty nice with this pretty slow weapon. If you got any tips on the Rattler, just let me know, because I'm pretty curious. Subscribe for way more Horizon Zero Dawn tips. Hopefully this was helpful. Like the video if you did, and I will speak to you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Goodbye.